Broadcasting from the Symphony Studios in Marietta, Georgia, it's time for the Technology Harmony Podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. Tune in every week as we spotlight the very best minds in our industry. Now here are your hosts.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 37th episode of the Technology Harmony Podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. I am one of your hosts today, Katie Galley, and I am joined by my co-host, the general manager here for Symphony, Scott Harrison. How are you doing, Scott?
Hey, Katie, how are you this morning?
I am doing awesome. I'm super excited to have you join me. We've been doing this podcast for a couple weeks, but this is the first time me and you get to go host an episode together.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thanks for the invitation.
Me too. Absolutely. I'm super excited. So Scott, I know we've got some big things coming from Symphony. And for you specifically, I know you're heading down to Florida. We're launching our Symphony Florida branch. How's everything going with that?
Super excited. Believe it or not, tomorrow I close on my home or property here in Atlanta. And then I will set sail at the end of the weekend or beginning of next week. So very excited to kind of start a new chapter in my life as well with Symphony. So
heck yeah. Well, we're super excited, of course, too, adding Scott to the team, not only as a co-host coming out of the Symphony studio, but obviously branching out into Florida. And so, Scott, today we are both super excited to welcome into our Symphony studio with us to have a conversation the systems engineer of enterprise infrastructure at CommScope, Tony Rossi. How are you doing, Tony?
I am doing well. How are you doing, Katie?
Doing awesome. Thank you
Hey,
so
Tony.
much.
Hey, Scott.
Thank you so much for stopping by and sharing your story with me and Scott today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So Tony, just to get the ball rolling a little bit and to know your background, can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got the job that you have today?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Certainly nothing that was planned from the get-go. But I started in the Navy, so I spent 8 years active duty in the Navy in the nuclear power program. So
thank you very much for your service.
Yeah, happy to.
My father was Navy as well.
Happy to have done it. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed my time. Once I got over all the gripes of being in the Navy, at a low guy at the beginning. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I was a nuclear power operator, a nuclear power instructor. So I got to work on submarines and aircraft carriers.
Wow.
But then as I was getting out, I was working on my MBA. And then I was halfway through that and I was medically retired in 2010. So I literally stumbled into the data center industry in data center facilities management. The company that first hired me said, well, you've got this background, you know mission critical equipment, you know what infrastructure looks like, and you're working on your business degree, so you can manage these data centers. And turns out they weren't entirely wrong. I picked it up. There's a lot of similarities between a power plant and a data center. So I spent about the next 8 or 9 years kind of working in that space, really on the physical infrastructure of data centers and generally large enterprise, hyperscale, and cloud providers across the country. But I stopped really at the rack. My goal was to do power, cooling, connectivity, controls, safety, everything up to the rack. And then in my mind, I let the geek squad take care of whatever was taking place, whatever the cables were connected to, whatever the computers were doing, that was on them. My job was to support them. But I'd been aware of CommScope, and one of the data centers I managed here in North Carolina for a while was a big CommScope shop, all the copper and fiber. So I got to meet some people. And then this opportunity came up about 2 years ago. And the gentleman that I replaced, he's still at CommScope, but he was moving to Texas. I actually saw him speak about a year before I joined. And he was presenting to a conference I was at for mission critical operations and building commissioning. And this was early 2018 and telling us what 5G was going to be.
Who was that, Tony?
That was Steve Schmerber, the
great
man,
guy.
the myth, the legend.
Absolutely. I worked with him for almost 6 years.
Yeah. And he's, that really like kind of planted this idea in my head because I'm as I got to meet Steve a couple times and knew his legacy. I mean, just to put it in perspective, Steve started at Bell Labs, AT&T Bell Labs. And so he's been with his lineage with CommScope through the acquisitions. He's like 39 or 40 years now. If he hears this, he's going to kill me for dating him. But I mean, literally going back that far with the lineage we have to Bell Labs, ostensibly that's where Ethernet was created. So we've got this lineage. So here I am hearing Steve, who was there kind of at the birth of the Ethernet and structured cabling as we know it. And he's telling us what 5G is going to be before Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile were blasting it on our commercials, and what it was going to mean to not just your cell phone, but the technology industry as a whole. I'm like, man, this is some cool stuff. And then a year later, another colleague that you probably know, Scott, Tamara, who's been a longtime account manager here in the Carolinas, she said, hey, Steve's moving to Texas. We think you should take a look at his job. I mean, so I said, that sounds cool, but you guys know that I don't do copper and fiber. This is new space for me. Oh yeah, you'll figure it out. And so again, I trusted him and knew it was a good team. And because of what I saw of CommScope, and so we are, and I don't think it's just my opinion, but probably the world's leading communications technology manufacturer. And we have been in many spaces for a while. To be on the forefront of building the things, and then to be able to work with, all the partners, like Symphony, that are actually, in many cases, doing the cutting edge installs, right? So the people that are trying to push the boundaries of 5G or of edge compute or something, they're not using equipment and material that you buy off of eBay. No offense to eBay. I managed their data centers for a while too, but they're using the best equipment that they can get their hands on, which in many cases is ours. So we get to kind of be on that vanguard of where technology is going and kind of get to see a little bit into the future. At my perspective, I'm not inventing anything. I don't have any patents myself, but to be on that edge is kind of cool, because I've always been a technology geek, and so this just kind of fits right in. So yeah, I've been going on 2 years now. I've been here and support our enterprise customers. So what that means, what you said in the beginning, Katie. So enterprise infrastructure for us means campuses, whether that's corporate campuses or healthcare schools or just large commercial buildings, right? So a large install. So not necessarily big data centers, but also not, just mom and pop commercial and small shops and small installs. So we get to deal with those big customers that want to, use the best that's out there. And I think essentially all of the Fortune 250 companies are our customers in one product line or another. So, we get to, in many cases, help out some of the brands that myself as a consumer and as a citizen rely on. So it's kind of cool to know that, every once in a while I helped, build that. I can show my kids, hey, that's CommScope too.
Yeah. That is cool. I mean, leaving a really unique legacy. I mean, and it's clear through the journey that you've taken in your own career paths, making these different shifts. But you said kind of being driven by kind of being a technology geek, really kind of getting involved in that tech space. So, Tony, can you share a little bit about then why technology? Why is it something that it kind of sparks your interest so much?
Well, so part of it, Katie, is just the geek side, right? That's my one of my nerd afflictions, I guess, if you will. I got other stuff, I like history and that kind of thing too. But just technology's cool to me because it's evolving, and I think just being where I am, my age, my generation, kind of becoming, just ahead of, the digital natives.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is just thinking about what you said. And quite honestly, only a couple of weeks ago, Katie interviewed me and she was asking how I got into technology. And my father later in his life became an entrepreneur in the office machine business, but he started in the Navy. And when he went off into the Navy as well, he spent a lot of time at Pearl Harbor and a few other areas. And they actually, because of his intelligence, put him into electronics. And so that was actually the last name of his company, was Advanced Electronic Office Systems. So he was way ahead of his time. But that's in turn what basically launched me into this whole technology career, which, I ended up even working for CommScope for a period of time. And now I'm here at Symphony. So Kind of cool.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about what your dad. The one thing that probably the most important thing that as it relates to my career that the Navy taught me was how to learn. So yes, we had to learn nuclear power and physics and how to operate a submarine or an aircraft carrier. But a lot of those power plants and propulsion plants are different. They've got the same framework, but every time you go to a new command or a new ship, you have to relearn and requalify it quickly, right? You can't spend 2 or 3 years learning how this works. So that part of the Navy taught me how to learn things quickly. And I'd always been, an avid reader and kind of wanting to learn stuff more. So getting that tool in my back pocket to know how to pick up the important stuff and then be able to understand what's happening. I think that probably lent itself to why I have taken a couple different turns in my career, is that, I've not been too terrified to try something new, which I think is probably one of the things that you either love or you hate about technology, depending upon your, potentially your generation or where, what you've been exposed to. Is it either freaks you out because it's moving too fast, or you just acknowledge that's what it is. That's what life is today. Technology is evolving. So don't worry, right? It will change a little bit, but you've got time. You don't have to be, not everybody has to be up to speed on anything that's CNET or Wired or somebody's putting out every single day, right? That's not practical, right? That's an entire company or entire set of journalists learning about all the technology. So you just kind of run with whatever's in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really is a good point. Technology is ever evolving. It's never stopping. And you said with CommScope, it's trying to stay ahead of, you can't really guess what is to come, but it's your, best educated guess as to, based upon how things have played in the past, looking forward to the future with how technology is going to shift and shape. And so, Tony, with that, how, and specifically in your role with systems engineer of enterprise infrastructure with CommScope, looking into the future of technology, how do you maybe see things shifting or taking shape over, just looking forward?
Yeah. So that's one of the questions that our customers, even especially our longtime customers, want to know from us, because we do have a history of kind of being a little bit ahead of the curve. As far as so CommScope, if we go back in time, CommScope started in the coaxial business, right? So back in the 70s, providing coaxial cable to all the broadband providers that were at that time taking cable TV across the country and across the world. And we were at one point like 70 or 80% market share. So we were coax, but then we saw that, these nascent Ethernet networks were coming out. So there was going to be structured cabling in more than just the government and large universities. That was going to spread out. So that's when we invested in that line and added Systemax to our portfolio. But then we bought Andrew Telecom in 2007, I think. And Andrew was the largest name in macro antennas, right? So all the big antennas on cell towers. Andrew was the biggest name and still is.
That's the big old lightning bolts, correct, Tony?
Right. So if you remember the 2G, the 2G radios, which had a kind of like this cornucopia shape to them in a big circle, then the 3G was just a big dish. If you see a red lightning bolt on there, that's Andrew. Now with all of the 4G and 5G ones, they're like tall and rectangular and skinny, so you don't really see that label anymore. But most of them are still there, right? So Nokia and Ericsson, who are the two leaders in the radios, they come to us to help co-develop the antenna technology. So we got into that a year before the iPhone was released. So I don't know who was responsible for that. Somebody at CommScope has a crystal ball, but seeing that networks were going to become intertwined, right? And now that we acquired Aris and Ruckus, we have the switching and the wireless side. There's really no type of communication network that we're not in now, except for satellites, which may or may not happen one day, because everything's kind of coming together. So to get back to your question, Katie, that's for us as we're building the networks, and CommScope, you can think of us and partners like Symphony is kind of the plumbers of the internet is kind of how I really succinctly try to explain it. We build the plumbing.
Katie, you know what he said? He said a term that you always use, and he said everything's coming together.
Together.
Yeah.
Creating harmony, if you will, right?
Well, that's the goal. Mm-hmm. The reality is there's a lot of discord right now. Right. There's a lot of weird minor fifths going on. I don't know if you guys are actually music nerds or not, right? But we try to help solve that, right? We try to take that discord and it needs to become harmony, right? Because maybe 10 or 15 years ago, people were, installing cabling in their office building. It was because they're connecting computers and printers. They weren't thinking about, do I need to be able to get a signal from Verizon? And how am I going to have guest Wi-Fi all over the place? And now IoT stuff. So they kind of built it on all throughout the years.
I love this, Tony. Basically, there's just a bunch of noise and everybody's just trying to put it together. Right. But it's so loud that no one knows what to do with it, which is in turn, that's really, if we could take that, right, and put it into, Katie will laugh at 4 movements or however you want to look at it, then it becomes a symphony.
Right.
So, which in turn kind of feeds into who we are and what we do as well. We integrate that.
Yeah.
So really cool.
If we're talking about like a brand new building that's being built or a headquarters, that's a little bit easier because now we can kind of see, probably better than in the last decade or so, we can see a little bit further out. Like we've got Wi-Fi 6 that just came out, and that's going to we're going to kind of be on that step for a little while when it comes to Wi-Fi. 5G is just starting to come online. It's going to take several years before it really matters. If my cell phone can get 5G, that's another day we can get into. But
it says it can.
Yeah. And the wireless landscape, so cellular over the air, that's going to kind of be our plateau for the next 5, 6, 10 years, perhaps. They're already working on 6G, but again, it's going to kind of slow down. And now that we're kind of at this 10 gig bandwidth when it comes to copper cabling going out to Wi-Fi access points, like we're just now getting to where that's needed, even though we've had it, right? So category 6A cabling, for instance, right? Copper cabling has been out for 12 years now. But even then it was ahead of its time for anybody that was outside of the data center. But now if you want a Wi-Fi 6 access point, which everybody's starting to buy, you have to have 6A cabling to get a 10 gig connection. So the good thing is we're kind of at this point where if we're trying to help recommend, to a partner as to what they should be looking at installing, or a customer how they should design a building, we can kind of have a little bit more confidence in what the next decade is going to look like. Where it gets a little tricky is they're like, okay, well, why do we need that? Or what's going to plug into it? Mm-hmm. That, I don't know. We don't know, right? I mean, right. I can tell you that over the next year or two, they're probably going to start putting in Wi-Fi 6. They're going to want to bring in some in-building wireless for 5G, right? They're going to want to be able to have some like edge architecture and switching, so we can help with all that, but we don't know, what IoT technology is going to be here next year, let alone 5 years from now. But the infrastructure needs to be in place and ready to be adaptable and support that. So stuff that we don't know exists today.
Tony, let's think about that. So let's take, for example, just a building owner or something like that, right? I mean, obviously that building owner, depending upon what he's going to do, he needs to make sure that, he's got plenty of runway with whatever technology he decides to deploy and integrate so that it all kind of works together, correct? So that's right now you would have to take careful consideration in what you're doing, which is probably why CommScope is one of the leaders in the industry.
Right. So we've got our eyes on all that, right? So we're not just, even though some people still aren't quite used to it, we're not just a cabling company, right? We've got the end-to-end solution. And honestly, there's nobody else in the world that has that, no other manufacturer. Everything from the cable to the switches to the access points to cellular to Wi-Fi, we've got it all. But it's also, it kind of segues into the messaging that we're trying to preach, and other people are, in the industry too, is that we call it the fourth utility, but we're imploring upon people to, as they're designing things and building things, to treat connectivity as a utility, right? It's as important as water, gas, electricity. And there are parts of the world. Yeah, there's parts of the world. I think like all of Singapore now is part of their code that if you're building a new building, just like you're required to have a water, a gas, an electricity hookup, for them, I think it's fiber. Like you're required to have a fiber hookup, right? Just because, I'm not sure exactly why they made the decision, but the reality is everybody needs connectivity, right? And that is very difficult to retroactively do, which I'm sure Scott is super familiar with, right? It's easy to swap out access points. It's difficult to go in the wall and tear out the cabling because you didn't have good enough cabling in place, right? Mm-hmm. It's almost as difficult as having to redo your water pipes, right? That's not an easy thing, right? And building owners and engineers know that, that's a 20, 25-year investment. It's not going to be something you're going to replace. And so I think if anything, here we are right now, we're still in the middle of this pandemic, and I've got school-age kids. And so we're seeing all the impacts of what that's taken place, right? There's plenty of places across the country. I mean, here, even in Charlotte, there's something like 30% of our school district, there's 200,000 children, I think, in K-12, don't have reliable internet access at home, right? Some of that, there's obviously socioeconomic in there, but some of it is the service providers struggle to get it into the home because the infrastructure wasn't laid to get it there, right? So we're having to kind of figure out new ways, which CommScope can do, right? That's one of the cool things about 5G is it can become fixed wireless access. So that's actually going to be more important than 5G on your iPhone, is you can take a 5G signal, which is low latency and high bandwidth, and bring it to a fixed wireless access point. So instead of having fiber to the home, you have 5G to the home, but now you've got super fast, broadband internet within the home. So there's a few ways that we can kind of jump around the fact that the infrastructure wasn't in place, but it's difficult to kind of get all those, like you said, in harmony, to put it together. But that's why we're saying now, if you have the opportunity, because you're building or retrofitting, like connectivity has to be considered like a utility. Mm-hmm. And it can't be an afterthought, which it usually is, because the IT or the business unit, they're like, oh, I don't know what we're going to plug in next year or 5 years from now. And
I really like that metaphor.
We don't know.
Have you heard anybody use that as an additional utility yet? Since you've been doing all these podcasts, that's a great metaphor.
Yeah, that is. And two, I mean, the topic that does come up specifically, like Tony and Scott, you're both saying with IoT, is having those conversations in on the front end and really bringing that connectivity that needs to be discussed like well before, construction goes up. And so, Tony, how does CommScope address that? I mean, you're saying it's difficult sometimes to not have connectivity then be an afterthought. So how does CommScope kind of bridge that educational gap and show, okay, this really needs to be talked about on the front end and addressed now?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's largely my job description, right? I mean, I do help with, a traditional sales engineering type role, which is, as people are building things, if they have issues, or post-sale support if anything comes up. But a lot of what my job is to educate the industry or to educate the end user, right? Mm-hmm. So I spend a lot of time, I mean, it used to be traveling, but now here online, getting in front of like a design engineering group, right? So a partner like Symphony kind of already knows this, right? But an architectural engineering group, they probably have low voltage people, but to them, it's still a little bit of an afterthought, because what the need isn't clearly defined when they're creating a specification, because IT doesn't know what they're going to use in 2 years or 2 months, let alone 10 years. Whereas they can kind of pretty well define what the power needs are going to be and what the actual civil engineering type stuff is going to be. So, my job is to kind of help inform the discussion and push the discussion. I hope it helps when it comes from me because of my background, because I spent so many years living on the operation side and being responsible for the facility. Right? I was the one that had to live with all those decisions, good, bad, or indifferent. Right? Mm-hmm. Some design engineer didn't predict that we needed connectivity to this corner of the data center, or that we were going to need power and cooling over here. So as an operations person on the facility side and infrastructure, I know what it's like to live with those bad decisions. So it's not just me wanting to help the sales team sell more CommScope. It is, I know this is going to suck if we don't try and help you now. Right? It's honestly just trying to help them. And
it's important that we future-proof that whole ACE community, right? I mean, those are the ones that are really, really working through it. If we don't future-proof anything, then 2-3 years from now, the building owner is going to say, you know what, I'm dated, or what do we do now? And he's going to have to go in and gut the place. So I agree with you completely on that.
Yeah, and the other thing I like about CommScope is it's really relationship focused. Part of that is the way we do business, right? So we don't sell directly to anybody. We sell to distributors, and distributors, like you guys buy from a distributor. The end user doesn't even buy it directly. So that, I'm not a salesperson, but that kind of takes some of the mess out of, am I having this conversation to be able to move some product? There's other people that have to, close that specific deal, so to speak.
Yeah, you have a very, CommScope has a very nice consistent delivery method by just utilizing the channel in the right way. So
right. But it's also part of our ethos, to be in kind of a long-term relationship type of perspective. And probably the two worst things that could happen, one would be somebody has a quality issue, right? That the product doesn't work. That's never fun. But probably the worst thing would be if a customer were to come back specifically to CommScope, regardless of who installed it or designed it, and come to CommScope and say, you're our trusted partner when it comes to network technology. Why didn't you tell us we were going to need X, Y, and Z? Right? That would be the kick in the gut. So we don't want to be the person that when the customer says, I don't know if I need 6A cabling, let's just get 6 because I'll save some money. We don't want to be the person that said, it's not about the money. Right? Operationally, this is why you need the cable. Buy it from us, buy it from somebody else, but you're going to regret this decision. We don't want to be on the flip side of that conversation. That hurts.
So Tony, back similar when I was doing major integration work for the federal government would have, large 7-8 figure deals, big monster deals. Mm-hmm. And I remember, I can't say the name, but they gave me a call one day and they said, I gotta tell you something. You're 1% of my budget, but you're 99% of my problem. Yeah, that's why it's so
not a good call.
No, it's not at all. But it's so important that we know exactly what we're deploying and how we're going to deploy it, and pull it all together seamlessly. So,
yeah. Did that answer your question, Katie? I think we went in 3 different circles.
I love it. Yeah. It's great though, because you touch on so many different things and you go down all these different paths. But yes, of course, it really does. And I mean, it just speaks to both you and Scott saying, the importance of having those conversations ahead of time and having actual cases where it shows, these are the issues that are going to come up if we don't do this right now. It should not be, and it cannot be an afterthought anymore.
Yeah. And we can have that conversation outside of the CommScope product line, right? So probably it used to be maybe half of the, presentations I would give, when either one of my sales team people or, a partner would ask me to come speak to this group or that group. I wouldn't, I'd talk to them for an hour or two and not have a single CommScope product in there, right? Because it's, trying to just educate them. And I like that part of it, but also I think it gives a little bit more credence to what we or you guys are trying to say to a customer. Mm-hmm. When the message is true, regardless of whether you use our product or somebody else's product, right? This is where things are going. These are the needs you have. And it's not about our product. We think our product is best suited for that, but the need exists, product agnostic.
Yeah. Well, that is a really good point. Well, Scott, do you have any closing questions for Tony before we wrap?
No. The only thing I would ask is, obviously he has Ruckus on his shirt. What Ruckus? Real quick, Tony, what does Ruckus mean? What is
Ruckus is the coolest thing in Wi-Fi. Is pretty much what it is. Definitely the best branding in Wi-Fi. I've got little Ruckus plushies that my daughter keeps stealing, but so we acquired Eris and Ruckus April 4th of last year. Yeah, it's still 2020. April 4th of 2019. So we bought Eris, and Ruckus was part of Eris. So Eris is the largest name when it comes to broadband network equipment. So in the United States, if your cable or whoever your internet provider is, they might have their logo on your modem and Wi-Fi that they give you, but if you flip it over, there's a good chance it's an Aris product. So that's really on the service provider broadband network. Ruckus is true enterprise networking. So there's two parts of it. There's the switches and there's the actual Wi-Fi. So the switches are actually from the Brocade and Foundry lineage. That goes back 20 years of Foundry, Brocade, and kind of back forth and split off a couple times, but a long legacy of the actual switches, right? So enterprise switching, not so much, hyperscale cloud compute switching. But then Ruckus Wi-Fi goes back almost as far. And we literally have the best Wi-Fi in the market, and we have the patents to prove it. And it's the commercial grade Wi-Fi. I mean, I can set it up in my house, but we're not selling Ruckus Wi-Fi to consumers, right? Aris can do that with some of the products, but really commercial grade indoor and outdoor Wi-Fi. And so we are the leader in the technology space. Our competitors license some of our patents from us because of how good our radio technology is, for instance, or the antenna technology inside the access points, but also hands down, we have the best solutions to the most complex problems. So when it comes to a large arena or perhaps an Olympics trying to set up Wi-Fi in a super dense environment, when you're talking about tens, hundreds of thousands of people trying to connect, Ruckus is far and away kind of the leader in that space. So that's really cool. Not just that we added to our line so that we finished out, we've got all these cables and apparatus connecting everything. Now we have those things that the cables are connecting to, but that we bought the best technology out there. So it's been a really cool harmony, if you will, coming together because we both on the legacy Ruckus side and the legacy CommScope infrastructure have that same lineage of always trying to be the best and push the technology out there, and kind of have a history of putting the proof in the pudding there. So
sounds like a great acquisition.
Yeah,
it really has been, and it was a large acquisition. This is actually the third time that legacy CommScope acquired a business unit that was at least or almost twice the size of the existing CommScope.
Wow.
So when we acquired the TE business in 2014-15, we tripled the size of CommScope. The same thing happened when we acquired Aris last year. So we were, I don't know what the numbers are off the top of my head, say $4 billion a year. Then we acquired Aris and we're $12 billion a year. So that's the other great thing, is that usually when the small guy buys the big guy, it's because there's more inherent value in the big guy. But we've always kept the CommScope name, the CommScope branding, the CommScope ethos throughout. Even though we've acquired larger chunks of business and brought them in, the CommScope stuff inside of it, is strong enough to be, to stay.
Yeah, the heritage still exists. So, congratulations, Ruckus, for joining CommScope.
Yeah. It was interesting for them, right? Ruckus is pure Silicon Valley, right? Like born and bred in Silicon Valley. So
right.
I think they've still had a little hard time adjusting to the fact that, CommScope is born and bred and still exists in Hickory, North Carolina. So definitely a little bit different pace.
Yeah, most people just think you guys make furniture up there, but
no. And, we've got
all good.
We've got
cool. Thank you for answering that for me, Tony.
But yeah,
Katie.
It does seem to, you've touched on it, it seems, Tony, in different ways throughout our talk today, that CommScope's big things seem to be legacy, but then also relationship building, like you said. I think you mentioned that earlier. That's building those relationships with people you're trying to help educate, but then too with some, a company like Ruckus helping to build out so that you can help more people and educate more people.
Right.
Love that. Well, Tony, yes, again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. If someone wanted to learn more about you, learn more about CommScope, where might they do that?
Well, the internet.
Yep.
We love the internet, right? So CommScope.
How about an email address?
So as of a couple months ago, everything has been rolled into CommScope.com. So there was still an Eris and a Ruckus website. So everything in our entire umbrella is at CommScope.com. And follow us on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can email me. So I'm t.rossi, R-O-S-S-I, at CommScope.com.
Thank you all for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about our guest and their company, check out the show notes for the relevant links. If you would like to learn more about us here at Symphony, of course, subscribe to our podcast on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook at Symphony Technology Solutions and on Instagram at Symphony Tech Solutions. Here at Symphony, our ultimate goal is to make harmonious music out of all the technological noise. And we hope today's episode helped in doing just that. See you next time.